Good evening, everyone. If you're not familiar, City Council holds a caucus every Thursday at 6 p.m. normally to discuss issues and just to get some information to City Council members to discuss the agenda and like I said, just to disseminate some information among council members. This evening, we're going to take that time of our caucus to say, during this public caucus, we will discuss improvements to the city's pension plans. No other discussions will be entertained at this time. Joining us this evening is Attorney Larry Durkin and representatives of the police and fire unions, Mr. Ed Bonin and Mr. John Judge. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us this evening to discuss this very important matter, and really we'll just turn the floor over to you.
Okay. Well, anytime we're talking about pensions, and particularly changing anything having to do with pensions, it's complicated, and it's complicated quickly. There's a tier structure of rules that we go by, starting with the second Class A state code. Then from there we have agreements that the city has reached with the police and fire unions, and then also ordinances which council has passed regarding pension issues. So to talk at all about pension, like changing a pension structure, is tricky, to put it mildly, and not least of which the other law that's out there is Act 205, which has significant restrictions on how pensions can be changed in particular. And so there are limits to what can be done unilaterally to amend or change anything having to do with pension benefits. In the last year or so, the city and unions have made some significant steps. Most recently is the change to the way that disabilities will be administered. I think that's a significant change, and what I mean specifically by that is that disability pensions will be basically decided by a physician that's agreed upon between the city and the union. So I think that is a significant change that is already that is in process. We're waiting for the administrator to handle that portion of it. The second thing the city and unions have done is the unions have made a substantial monetary contribution within the last year. I think that is significant. And we have the expectation that the city is going to put a significant portion of the sewer proceeds in. That's extremely significant. So those are some things that have already occurred. In terms of, from my perspective, this has been a topic primarily at the police board of additional changes that we can implement now without, like on our own, with the authority that we now have, is that at the police board there has been a kind of an ongoing discussion about enforcing some existing language that exists, some existing ordinance language that exists regarding disability pensions. And this, without quoting it, the gist of the language is that when an officer goes out, and from the way I read it, it's an officer who goes out with less than 25 years in, so it's an early retirement. That's the opinion that I've given to the board. There's a mechanism by which, if that officer goes out and starts earning money, that the pension can be reevaluated. Not the award of the pension so much, but the amount of the pension. So that is some existing authority that we have, that we can now, we have the ability legally, in my view, to begin to enforce that. And there have been there have been discussions, not just with police, but with, fire also on this topic. It's one that it's been more of a discussion at the police board. But I think within the existing system that we have, I think that starting with the board, I think the board has the authority to start to develop rules and then implement that language in a way that it has not been previously. So, in terms of reform, if that's the right word, I mean, I think that's something the boards have the ability now to do. The discussion that I've had with the boards about this is that it should be done in a systematic way. This is language that's been there for many years. I'm not actually sure how many years, but a long time. This is language which I think if we're going to do this, then we need to. The board itself needs to adopt rules on how this will work, so that it's done in an equal way, and it's done with a process that's fair to those that are impacted.
Attorney Durkin, would you need a case for that, or is that something that you could just start at any time?
I think we can. I think we have the authority now to develop the rules. I think that it's something that needs to be done thoughtfully, because it is something that hasn't been done, over time. It's certainly something I expect we'll have some pushback on. The process needs to be fair, and the process needs to be thought out. One discussion we've had is that it might be wise to go to some other plans that do this, and speak with them to see what they've learned, and help us avoid any pitfalls that may come with this.
Are we kind of worried about past practice coming into play? Is who's that first person that's going to
I think
get reevaluated? Is that the crossroads that we're worried about?
It's not so much past. I'm not particularly concerned about past practice, and I think Judge Mazzoni actually just dealt with that issue in the litigation that we had. He addressed the topic of past practice and whether or not it applies at the pension board level. It's if the board is going to do something like this or implement a program, like any program, whether it's how we evaluate disabilities, what our process is for running meetings, how we're going to conduct a hearing, I think it has to be done uniformly. It can't be done on an individual basis. In my opinion, if we're going to proceed with this, I think the first step has already been taken, which is to determine, do we have the authority to do it? I think the second step then becomes, how are we going to, what rules are we going to follow? And for something like this, I think we would want, I've discussed with the board that we would want to adopt rules on how we're going to do this. The way that the ordinance language reads is and the way I interpret it, this is something that would apply to those that left early on a disability. Not necessarily you might have situations, I know we've had situations over time where you've had an officer or a firefighter come in with, 30 years on the job, and they've had 30 years on the job, they've met the age criteria, and they also were designated disabled when they left. My opinion is that's not the group we're talking about. There are a couple of reasons for that. On the fire side, I think the ordinance is a little clearer that those people would not apply to them. On the police side, I think my rationale is that they're already fully vested in their benefit. It's the intent of the language of the ordinance, as I understand, as I read it, and as I would expect the board to apply it, is early, like when someone leaves early, because that has a significant cost that is not frankly contemplated in the structure of the fund. I mean, there is an accounting within, our Act 205 reports for disabilities, but the premise of the fund is basically that you were there for 25 years, and you're, for the most part, you're 55 when you retire. That's how it's been addressed over time. When you change that, that's a big cost. If someone retires at 35, that's a 20-year swing.
Sure.
So that has is a significant, it's a material cost to the fund. So from my perspective, as we develop the rules, there's an importance to having it done uniformly, like to all people who fit that criteria, and in a systematic way. I would not recommend, we look at the roster and say, okay, we're going to ask this guy, or we're going to ask that guy, or whatever. It would have to be done in a uniform, systematic way, and it's not hard to anticipate that there would be a dispute regarding some of this. So the process of how we handle those also, I think, has to be considered. But I think in terms of how the board does things now, that's an area where I think we can start doing some work on. I think I think a dividing a way to look at the issues with pensions sometimes is, well, what has the city negotiated with its partners, the unions, or what has the city done on its own? When that came up, frankly, in the issue with police and fire raises, the case that we were just in front of Jennifer Mazzoni on, and obviously for any topic that has been the subject of negotiation, that continues to be, a subject of negotiation with the unions. That's not like the board has no role in that, like to be, on either side of that equation. Frankly, we're not. That's not what we're there for. But if we already have authority, or there's an agreement on authority for us to do something, then I think, like this issue with the recapture, then I think that's something that we can, push, perhaps more than it has been. Along those lines, and this is not, this is not an exciting, recommendation, but I think one thing that can make the administration of these funds more systematic is, frankly, if we had everything in one place. Like if we had all the contracts, I don't just mean with police and fire, but with non-uniform also, like in one place. And I know this sounds like a very basic concept, but...
Are you talking about basically taking the rules, regulations, and the existing ordinance and codify them into one single ordinance?
I'm not even talking about making an ordinance. I'm just talking about making a book.
Okay.
I'm talking about physically being able to find them or having them in one place so that you could physically go to and go through them and say, we know this is the universe. Like we've talked with our, the city knows what its contracts are, the police know what their contract to fire, and they're all in one place, physically. I don't think you need to do an ordinance. We just need them in one place. And frankly, the same thing with the ordinances. Right now, when you go to research, what the ordinances are that are applicable, if you go on the city's website and you go to the general code, there's a lot of stuff on there that no longer applies. That's either, I can, even the membership of the board, if you went right now and looked at the city's website and you looked up and said, well, what do the ordinances say, or what's online say about, the structure of the boards, you would find a 2002 ordinance which has been overturned. There's always a concern that when you're looking at something online, do you really have what you need to have. But if all of the pension-related ordinances were in, the hard file of councils were in one place, online or in a book or wherever, I think that would make things much easier for everybody to know where they stand, the board or anybody else who has a question about it.
No, I agree with that, but wouldn't it be easier just to scrap all those old ordinances and just come up with a brand new one that makes sense for everybody, that everybody knows exactly what the rules are, and then we have it all in one place? I know we can do that with what you're talking about, but we have to also manage that.
I mean, you might ultimately get to that.
Yeah.
The ordinances that we operate under, on the fire side, the last, I'm going to say, systematic ordinance that, went through, almost every topic with the fire fund was from 1964. So we're getting close to, and we might be over 50 years on that. The last major ordinance on police is the mid-1950s. So you have a lot has happened, since then. It may very well be that, if you start at least with getting it all in one place, then I think you can decide, you can talk with your partners and say, well, what, what in here needs to be updated or not, but it's that, some of the stuff is that basic. Like if it could be in one place, that would make things a lot easier. Some things would take, some things are dictated by state law, which, we don't have the ability, and anybody on the city level does not have the ability to address. This is on a non-uniform side, the state code that's applicable to Scranton provides a specific mechanism of how disability pensions are evaluated for non-uniform employees. And it talks about the board having a panel of 3 physicians. Like that's a unanimous panel of 3 physicians as the criteria for determining a non-uniform pension. That's not realistic. I mean, that's getting a physician is a challenge. The state law under the 2A code is I'm fairly confident it's from the 1950s also. But there's nothing that you could do to change that. The council, just as a matter of law, can't amend a state statute. So there are some things we're stuck with, dealing with, until we can get things on the state level, changed. That's one that comes to mind. There's other language that has made its way from state law into the ordinances, which is still there, that is hard to fit into 2017. There's references to boards of health in the ordinances and state law. And I don't know when the last time there has been a board of health. I mean, probably prior to 1950. So there are things that can be done within the existing structure, and I can, I'm comfortable that the one disability topic I referenced, that's one of them that can be done. There are certainly things that you would have to go to your partners with and identify, what is subject to negotiation. And there's a process for doing that, and the board doesn't have a role in that and isn't looking for a role, in that. And then there are some things just very basic, that would make it a lot easier, and a lot more. The less ambiguity in my, view, and the more clarity we have on what the rules are for everybody, I think ultimately is more desirable in terms of how it functions. Those are some of the topics, that, come to mind, from what I've seen, over the, last 5 or 6 years.
Assuming some changes are made, and obviously there's a number of things that are going to be discussed, what assurances are being done on the pension board side to make sure what the city promises is actually followed through? Because right now, there is a credibility problem with the city and the pension board from things that happened, no fault to any of you sitting there, but in the past, where employees had promises made to them that weren't kept, and the taxpayers were under different assumptions.
Address one thing with that. And I think that that's where we have some issues right now with the pension board. From the union side, I know that there was contracts negotiated and a couple things were put in there. There was a promise that there was going to be a large sum from the sale of the sewer authority to shore up that pension fund. We had members go from a 3.5% contribution rate to 6% contribution rate. We had talked with most of the members that are up on council right now that were here when those negotiations were done. We had talked to them about some of the things that would change. I could tell you from the fire pension board, since that's happened, I think we've had maybe 11 or 12 retirements. Of that, one has been a disability pension. But we also gave, in those contracts, there was language for the city to implement changes to how we give disability pensions, that we were going to use a doctor who is an expert in the related field. Those ordinances still have not come to fruition. So we're still working off the old set of languages, and we're 2+ years in.
What, and is there a reason for that, do you
Well,
know?
those are negotiations between the city and the union, and I know that, you know, Tom Jennings, who has passed on now, was involved in those, but I believe that was some negotiations that I was involved in when I was still union president. They were trying to get those ironed out so that they could bring them to council and pass those corresponding ordinances. But until that happens, there's nothing we can do. We're still off the old way. But I think that there's been due diligence done with the boards at this point, where we're now one disability pension, and that person was 30 years on anyway and had their time and age to leave, so it didn't affect the pension fund. But what we're seeing from our end is we did everything that we were asked to do, and we were told in meeting after meeting that there was going to be a large sum from the sale of the sewer authority, and it was going to be placed into the pension fund. Well, it seems like that's not happening now, or we're doing something completely different, or I've heard things of we're going to put money in trust. Mazzoni's ruling told the city a couple things. It told us, yes, the raises were illegal, but it also told us that we have the authority as the board to make those decisions. Those boards are formed for a reason. We make the decisions on where those investments go. The city has the fiduciary responsibility to make sure that that money's there and that the pensions, that's one of the first things you're supposed to do under the state laws, fund the pensions. And, you know, we'd like to see those promises kept, and we'd also like to be involved in the discussions they're having. Like, where is this coming from now? And I think that that's some of the frustration we see on our end. We're doing everything we can due diligence-wise, and to get back to Attorney Durkin's point, with the clawback for the pension on the disability, that's going to be a complicated process, and how we're going to navigate through that's still yet to be determined. And I think something that the city has to do, and the pension board, before we do that, is see if this is actually going to be financially beneficial to the pension. Because if we're paying a third-party administrator to do a lot of that work, and we're not clawing back enough money, and we're actually paying somebody more than we're bringing in, that doesn't make good policy sense either. So we have to figure out exactly what it's going to do. And I think there's a lot of hurdles to overcome. And we've discussed these. We've been in meetings with the city alone, and then, you know, I've spoken to Attorney Durkin about it, and I know the police have had much more discussions about it. But there's still a lot to navigate through. And hopefully, like we had talked about, that we're going to ask who else is doing this rather than us trying to reinvent the wheel, because there's a lot of steps involved in this so that it is done right. And like you said, there's going to be challenges and there's going to be bumps in the road, but we're enforcing what we have in front of us. And we'd like to see a little bit more cooperation from the city's end and a little bit more dialogue between the boards. Boards are an autonomous arm now, okay? Mazzoni's ruling says that. We make those decisions. But we need to have a cooperation with the city, and it seems like there's like a blockage right now.
And that's, you know, happening now, and obviously what happened, not with the police or fire pensions, but in the 90s when something was offered to employees, they accepted thinking it was, you know, legal, and in the end it wasn't done properly on the city's end. You know, whatever we do, we can't go down that path. Whatever we do, we have to have full assurance that everything we're doing is legal, proper, and being done with the proper the proper proceedings, both on council's end, and we have a responsibility in that, but also on the board's end and the administration, because the city can't afford to make a mistake like that again, where you have, nobody, there's no winners. Everyone is lost in that situation.
I mean, I can say that in the time that I've been there, we have taken we have taken steps to, when we have seen an issue, we have addressed it. We have you've seen what's gone on with the non-uniform board. There have been I get requests for opinions on what can we do, what can't we do, and I think that there is we're aware that this is a significant issue. We're aware that there's a lot of scrutiny involved in what we're doing. At the police board, within the past year, we had a disability pension come in, and although that language has not been, an ordinance has not been implemented yet with the procedure that Mr. Judge is talking about, we did nonetheless seek out a physician outside the area to give an opinion on a disability pension, which was what the intent, of the bargain was in the most recent ordinances. So, we did take that step to try to have a higher level of scrutiny applied to it. We had recently, we had a disability request come in under non-uniform, where we also tried to ensure that we were having a specialist review it. So, there are a lot of small things, that happen along the way, we just hired a new investment manager, at the composite board level, so I think steps have been taken, and when there has been a problem where we have identified what we think is a problem, we have taken action on it. We have moved on it.
And my last point is just whatever is agreed upon between the city administration, council, the pension boards, the unions, whatever agreement is made needs to be kept. We don't want to have another situation like we've had in the past, and we all just need to make sure it's done right this time, because promises have been made to the city employees and to the taxpayers, and we need to make sure that this is addressed properly. I understand it's not going to be tomorrow, but we have to make sure we do it the right way, and appreciate the open dialogue today.
The two key components of reform that we've been talking about are the TPA, and Mr. Judge, you commented a little bit on that. I'd like to get more of your opinion on the TPA if you can, and also the concept of reducing the rate of return. We think that's vital as well.
Yeah, and this has been a pet peeve of mine since I got on the fire pension board, and even though it's addressed on the composite board with regards to the rate of return, some of the assumptions that have been taken there over the years have set the fund up for failure.
Exactly.
Let's be perfectly honest. I mean, it hasn't been, obviously, I know that some papers like to write about the high incidence of disability pensions and everything else, but the system's been broken in a number of different ways. We've been failed by the state, who allowed them to take a discount when we were distressed pension, which should have never been allowed. We should have been putting more in. We've had, a bunch of issues on the city side that we need to address, and with regard to this, we need to kind of figure out what the actual assumptions are. A rate of return of 8%, any financial advisor is going to tell you that's just pie in the sky. So then why are we setting ourselves up for an 8% rate of return? I've seen where I think some of the actuarial assumptions where they assume an age of retirement. The age of retirement is too high. Guys are going at a younger age, especially on the police and fire side, where we could retire. Some of our members are still under the old system where they can go 25 in any age. The majority of our membership now is under the 25 and 55 standard, but still going to 55. And if they're taking an assumption that most men will go at 62, most firefighters or police officers will go at 62, well, let's see what the historical data shows.
Right.
And let's be more realistic about it. Let's talk about life expectancy. All right, if somebody goes at 60, if they're saying somebody's going to go at 62 and they're going to only have a life expectancy to age 77, they're only going to draw on pension for 15 years when they're really maybe going to draw for 25 or 27, well, then we're setting the system up for failure right off the bat.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that was just the easy way out for all those years.
Yeah,
I agree.
and I think that unfortunately, some of the things, even reducing the rate of return, which have been discussions with the city, that makes them have to put in a substantial amount of money when we do that. Well, now's the time to do that. Let's fix it now, and I think that that's what needs to happen. Let's get it to more realistic return. We know that this is not going to be fixed overnight. This is going to take time. We know that, and we're starting to see a turn at this point, I feel, that we're starting to head in the right direction, but there's still a lot of hard work left to do, and there needs to be a cooperation between all parties, between the boards, the unions, council, and the city administration. And I think that if we can do that together, I think that, we could start to push this in the right direction. I might not see it in my lifetime and being funded to where it needs to be, but at least we could start moving that way. And I think that's what needs to happen. And I forget, the other thing.
Well, the TPA, you talked about a little bit, third-party administrator.
Yeah. And I think that third-party administrator, what their actual role is going to be, I still think that they're talking about that, and I believe there's a meeting set up next week, I believe, with the city to talk more about that with the boards. As far as what their role might actually be. And I think they've had some issue finding, to be honest with you, a third-party administrator.
No, that's true.
And that comes from, the solicitor of the city saying, it's tough to find that actual fits that contract language, what was agreed to. So I think that there are some things that they might be able to do, and I think we're working in that manner and working towards that point.
Okay, thank you.
One comment, if I could make, on the funding side, in terms of the assumptions, the actuarial assumptions, which is an enormous topic. I mean, that's an enormous deal. Act 205, though, places the responsibility for the assumptions with the city. The city ultimately makes those decisions in consultation with the board's actuarial. So those are decisions that come on the city level, and presumably that's because of the significant impact it has on the city's current obligation. But one topic which I've heard repeatedly from all of the professionals that have been with the board is that the Act 205 and the MMO, the minimum municipal obligation, there's a significant disconnect with, I think everyone assumes that if you make the MMO, you're going to get to a good funding status, and that's not the case. Like it is, every time they have come and they have presented to the boards on this topic, it's a minimum, and I'm not saying it's not a substantial liability and funding issue for the city, but the law does not match the math. And it will not get you to, from everything I have heard and seen, to a sustainable funding level by simply making the minimum. And John's right, the state built in a self-defeating, at least in terms of funding, relief valve on that for about a 7-year window. And there were years where the city's MMO was zero, and we were paying out $13 million a year. I mean, that can't work. Like that, there's no way that can work. But you can be in compliant with the law, and you will not have a well-funded pension plan. They don't match, and that's an issue from Harrisburg. But the burden it puts on a local level is that you might think that by meeting the law you will, but that has never. I've never heard a professional that addresses the board agree with that concept.
Does anyone have any other questions?
Yeah. With the clawback provision, do you know if that's ever been enforced?
Not in Scranton.
Okay. There's been several kind of high-profile cases lately in the newspaper documenting, city employees that go out on disability and then they get another job someplace else. So my question is, what recourse do we have currently, right now? And second to that would be, if you start enforcing what's on the books, does the employee have to notify the city, or how does that work?
Well, those topics are to be determined. I mean, that's, the language, is 2 sentences long. How you would do this would be a lot more than that. There would have to be notice to an employee at a minimum, that there is a process in place that we're going to enforce, but we're a ways away from, that taking place. To go back to the other part of your question, though, in terms of someone who leaves, as I read the state law, it's different in terms of fire and police than non-uniform. State law for non-uniform includes specific language saying that we can have someone come back in and for another exam after we've awarded a disability pension to them. I don't see that language for fire and police. So if state law provides that authority for non-uniform, then it's there. We can do it. We don't have nearly as many. The nature of the job is much different, between these groups. But so I do see it there for non-uniform, but I don't see it there for fire and police. So I don't. Once we make a decision that someone is disabled, that is. I don't see us having the legal authority to go back and say 3 years later, 5 years later, whatever it is, are you still disabled? As things currently stand, I just don't see it.
Okay. Even when it's brought to your attention, like the board's attention, that, like the newspaper did, hey, wait a minute, there's a guy here that went out on a disability pension, but he's a prison guard. So, I mean, does that, or you still can't do anything about it that way?
It's not so much a matter of what they're doing.
Right.
It's a matter of, from my perspective, it's a matter of what legal authority do we have to make them come in and,
Okay.
and do something. And in the absence, I'm not seeing it. And I've looked. I've been asked to look, and I have looked. And I've looked at the state law, and I've looked at the ordinances. I have seen it on a state level. It's either in the PSERS system, the state level employee retirement system, or it's either the state police or the state employees. One of the two has specific language which says, it references it as a temporary disability pension. And that contemplates up front that you could be asked to come back in, for an exam down the road. I don't see anything like that for us.
Okay.
So,
Now, is this something that has to be negotiated between the union and the city, or is this something that the city administration can just enforce and do on their own? How does that work?
Or is state law telling us we can't do it? That gets
I mean, I don't see the authority there to begin with, so I don't think there's any ability to, in my opinion, I think you'd have to sit down with your council and, or the city's council, however you want to phrase it. But I would not, in terms of me recommending something to the board, I'm only going to recommend it that we do something if I see the authority for us to do it there already. And I don't see it there now. I think the next step, you'd have to decide. You'd have to look at what do we need on a state, if we need something on a state level, and how would it work on a local level.
I think what you're talking about, though, you're asking, like, how do we start getting the prison guard in here? Is that what you're asking?
Well, yeah, I mean, when it comes to the city's attention, in other words, and from what Mr. Durkin said, I guess there's really nothing that we can do at this point.
It's a matter, and we've asked all these questions, and that's what we kind of got to figure out is exactly how he talked about before, putting the rules and procedures in place, because there's a number of different things that pop up when you have something like this. Okay, so if he's a prison guard now, you know, does he have to supply us with his tax returns? And how does that go? And I think what we've asked him to do is look and see if there's other municipalities doing this, because there's no sense in us reinventing the wheel. And what happens when that person no longer is in that employ? Do we then reinstate? Do they have a right to a hearing? There's a lot of procedural questions that I think, and these are the questions the board's asking, and we're trying to find our way through. Like you said, it's a two sentences. It doesn't really give us much direction. And he had talked about we have to kind of develop the rules and how we're gonna proceed through that. So it's gonna take a little bit of time, but I think.
Do we have a definite, like, timeline? Because I know, like, when I look back at some of the articles that were written and some of the conversations that we have had in the past, maybe year and a half, from the administration, they said, well, we're having discussions with the unions and we're working on it. So, like, have those discussions taken place regarding this issue, and is there a timeline on when we might see something?
I know on the board's level, we've had the discussions, and I know that I've been in a meeting with the city and talking about, you know, possibly using the third-party administrator for some of that work or something along those lines, because it is going to be paperwork intensive. So there needs to be somebody who's going to gather a lot of that information and bring it to the board so that we're able to, if we're able to claw that money back, is what the term they're using, how are those procedures going to be enacted? And I think that that's what we're looking at from our end, is how to kind of put those together. I think it's more of the board than it is the city.
I think the board has, I think it's the board's obligation to implement those procedures, because
Well,
the board
and
is,
that-
the board has,
Does the board have the ability to and the authority to do that?
the board has the authority to do it.
To change the rules or clarify the rules?
To implement to adopt rules to implement
Okay.
the language.
All right.
My view is that we have the authority to do, I think we're the only ones who frankly have the authority to do that. How specifically you do that, I mean, you know, like, we're a little bit like council, except we don't meet that often. Like, you know, we meet once a month for about half an hour, and that's it. So
To John's point, though, we're hopeful that the TPA is a way down that path, you know, because we think that's the role of that person, we feel.
Are you guys clear on what the third-party administrator will do? Like, can you explain what is the third-party administrator, what role it's going to play yet, or is that still unclear?
I could talk about it when I sat on the board. It was something that the city wanted in there to assist the pension boards. Exactly what their role is going to be, I think we're going to be involved in conversations as far as the RFPs going on. I know they're drafting the RFPs for it, but I think what they're running into, I got to be honest with you, is finding someone who does the work that they're going to require them to do. And I think that that's one of the hurdles, from what I'm hearing on the city's end, is that they've been having trouble finding somebody who's going to do something.
See, that's where the disconnect is, and I think everybody would agree with me, because we've heard for the last year, in fact, last April, that the third-party administrator was on the way, and there was, you know, I mean, it was, so this is...
I think that there are certain functions that you can anticipate would be in the private sector. I mean, you know, it's not exactly a workers' comp function, but there are, you know, workers' comp administrators that schedule exams. Like, and that frankly is a role that the boards would, I'm pretty confident, would want very little to do with, because that's going to be a challenge to get exams set up with specialists outside the area in a timely manner. Those are all significant. So I think that is probably a function that I would expect to see in the private sector. I mean, right now, if you went to anybody and said, would you want to do these two sentences in this ordinance, I would imagine one of their first questions is going to be, well, what are the rules? Like, do what? You know, what are the rules? How is it going to work? So no matter who is doing it, whether the board, you know, does it through its existing contractors or there's a new contractor, there has to be a framework for somebody to follow to implement, you know, the clawback language that we've been talking about. I think scheduling exams, that's a little bit more direct, you know, or common than some of the other things.
I just have one final question. Just a point of clarification. And I think it was Mr. Judge that said this. When someone, with the disability language, what the fire union agreed to in their contract, and then you mentioned that the unions are still having conversations with the administration and the ordinance hasn't been implemented yet. Can you just expand upon that? Because I don't understand.
That language with disability pensions, basically, right now, if somebody applies for a disability pension, there's 3 doctors. The city can send them to a doctor, the pension board sends them to an independent doctor, and it's not always an expert in the field, and then they have their doctor. If 2 out of 3 of the doctors say that it's a permanent disability, then they're pensioned out. The new language that was negotiated in the contract extension back in 15 was that they would now use a doctor in the related field of the disability from outside the area to take away any bias or anything along those lines. And there's corresponding language that needs to be developed and agreed to from the contract on that between the bargaining units. And I know there have been meetings and stuff, but once that's determined, we don't abide by the contract language. We need corresponding from the pension boards. We need corresponding, or we need appropriate language, ordinance-based, to go off of. So once they develop exactly what that language and how that's going to be used and how those doctors are going to be selected, because some of that has to be mutually agreed upon, those experts in the field with the unions. So
And
that's what they're looking at.
Is it normal for it to take that long? I mean, because the contract was 2 years ago.
I think part of the problem, to be honest with you, was the untimely death of Tom Jennings last year.
Okay. And I think, yep, that's all I have. Thank you.
Yeah, just one quick comment about the third-party administrator, and I don't want to get it to be confusing. A third-party administrator has been agreed upon to be used, correct? We're refining what that administrator is going to do, but since the agreement was made, there is going to be a third-party administrator. It's not an option of there's not going to be one or whatever. The third-party administrator has been agreed upon. It's just how it's going to function, actually, right?
And I just want to touch on one thing that you said, Mr. Judge, a point of clarification. When you said about the use of the sewer sale proceeds, where is the disconnect there? Because you said that the administration said that they were going to put in maybe more money than they are now. I didn't understand what you were trying to say by that.
The discussions that we had when
the agreements were
administration
going.
first came in was, we had been party to some of the meetings that some of the councilmen were at with Mr. Amorosa and stuff like that. And they outlined certain things, a lot of them being, the sale of the refinance of debt, the sale of the parking garage, the sale of the sewer authority, and if you remember, a lot of the presentations he made were, sale of the sewer authority, you're gonna have a one-time shot to make a large contribution to the pension fund. So we were always under that assumption, even when I was the president of the local and we were in contract negotiations, a lot of that talk was in there. There was never a specific dollar amount. I'll be clear about that, but there was always the assumption that there was going to be a large infusion of cash in there. That's why they asked for the unions have to do their part. We went from a 3.5% of our salary up to 6%. 6% was actually enacted this year, so now the members all pay 6%. The majority of them had been paying 3.5. The pre-87 members had been paying 4%, I believe. So we did our part. Now, when we hear about the meeting you guys had a couple Fridays ago, and I'm not privy to all the details of, some of the discussions, the disconnect for me has been, you now have this sewer authority funds, and for the longest time the papers have been talking about it, we've been talking about it, the city's been talking about it, that there was going to be a large amount of cash infused into the pension system to kind of turn the corner. All right, we know it's not going to superfund the pension system, and it seems like now that there's other avenues where that money might go, and that's fine. That's the city's prerogative to do that. We understand that. But it would be nice to be involved in that conversation. If you tell me, hey, rather than us putting in $30 million into the pension fund, we're going to re-existing high-interest debt, which is going to free up money down the road. That's fine. Let's make a plan together, like Attorney Durkin said, where you have, for years, that the MMO is just, it sets us up for failure because the MMO does not do anything for the health of any pension fund. Well, then let's say, all right, if you're able to clear $3.4 million off the book by refinancing the debt, rather than put in just a simple MMO, take some of that savings and fund it every year, additional funding above the MMO into the pension fund. But let's work together. It just seems like, and now I hear about the potential that there might be 18 million put in a trust fund until we agree to some language changes. I could pretty much tell you with pretty much certainty from my end, that's not going to happen. You're not going to, it feels like being strong-armed. And I think the pension boards, their authority is to make sure that the pensions are funded properly, that the money is allocated properly, that we follow the rules and regulations that are set forth. And those are all things that were talked about in Mazzoni's ruling. Our pension board, and the composite board specifically, is the one who determines where the money goes. And to be honest with you, the members who sit on that have a very vested interest in the health of this pension fund. The members who sit on the fire pension board have a very vested interest. The police board. This is, when we retire, that money being there is very important to us. So we want to see the right things done. And, you know, I know there's been hiccups along the way and years ago, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done to fix those. And we've started in that right direction. And we have people that are doing the right thing. Our attorney's advising us appropriately on what we have to do. That court case that we had with the raises, you know, both boards voted not to appeal it. We agreed with Judge Mazzoni's ruling. If there's another way that needs to go for those members to get their raises, well, then they might have another avenue or outlet. But from us sitting on the pension board, we're following the rules. And what we want to see is a cooperative effort between all of us.
So
quite frankly, it's for the health of the city overall, and it's for the health of the workers for when they retire.
So do you think that, I think it's 22 million that they want to put in the pensions, do you think that that's enough, or are you disagreeing with that?
It depends on how they're going to put that in. If they're going to say, we're going to put this 18 million in the trust for now and hold your feet to the fire on something, well, that shouldn't be their prerogative. The money and the allocation efforts are done by the pension board. None of us have a crystal ball. I've heard comments, well, geez, if we put that in and the market takes, you know, a dive the next day, you're going to, yeah, we know that, but we're also following the advice of our investment people who are telling us you need to have this much in securities, this much in stocks, and because of the distressed level of your pension being heavily on the conservative side instead of the aggressive side, that's the decisions that they're making, and they're following the advice of those professionals. And I don't know what the actual number is, Mr. Gahn, what they should put in. We know that it's severely distressed, and we know that the city's got a one-time infusion of cash here from the sale of something, and there's a lot of rights or a lot of wrongs that they have to fix with that money. And I understand that they have to put it to where it's going to serve the city the best. But those conversations should have all parties involved. And explain to me why you're doing it. You know, all right, we're going to do it, we're going to put it here because it's going to free up money here and we'll be able to put more in the MMO. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know we ran long, but it's very important information. I do appreciate your comments and attending the meeting tonight. I really anticipate this being the first of many. We'll try to schedule more time the next time, but I do appreciate you're spending time with us, and we'll keep working together. Thank you. We will take a 5-minute recess, and then we will resume the normal meeting. Thank you.